All right, so you're thinking about diving into the world of slate mixing, huh?
It's definitely a career path that most people don't think much about.
Not exactly the first thing that pops into your head when you're a kid, right?
Right.
But let me tell you, digging through all these roll catcher guides, I found it fascinating.
Yeah, it's a surprisingly niche field, but there's a lot more to it than meets the eye.
For sure. Like when I see those multicolored shingles on roofs, I never thought about how those colors come to be.
It's easy to just assume it's some simple process.
Right, like, oh, they just have buckets of different colored rocks or something.
Yeah, but it's way more complex than that.
Way more. I mean, Rollcatcher highlights how important slate mixers are to the whole roofing process.
Absolutely. The durability, the look of the roof, it all comes down to getting that mix just right.
And speaking of getting it right, Rollcatcher gets seriously technical about how they ensure that color consistency. Spectrophotometers, can you believe that?
That's what I'm saying.
High-tech stuff for mixing what's essentially rocks.
Yeah, they're adjusting constantly to make sure those granules hit those super precise color targets.
Wild. Right. Makes you appreciate those shingles in a whole new way.
For sure.
And speaking of seeing things differently, let's talk about the work environment. No fancy offices here.
Definitely not. Think more along the lines of industrial plants. We're talking massive mixers.
Oh yeah, Rollcatcher mentioned some of these mixers can be like 3 stories tall.
Exactly. Churning out tons and tons of these slate granules. It's a demanding job, no doubt.
Physically demanding, that's for sure.
Absolutely. Exposure to dust, noise. Those machines are working nonstop. Definitely not for everyone.
Not your typical 9 to 5, that's for sure. But that kind of makes me wonder about the career path itself. Like, where do you even go from entry level?
Well, that's one of the things RoleCatcher does well. They actually lay out a pretty clear progression for this field.
They do. You start as an entry-level mixer, put in the time, gain experience, and you can move up to senior roles, maybe even lead positions.
Yep, it's not a dead-end job by any
No,
means.
not at all. And get this, Rollcatcher found that a lot of those senior mixers, they end up going into management.
Really? That's interesting. Shows the kind of skills you develop on the job.
Right. It's not just about operating machinery. You're problem solving, you're paying attention to detail, all those skills translate.
Makes sense.
And those skills, those are valuable in a lot of different areas. So even if someone doesn't mix slate forever, they've got a good foundation.
Definitely. That's a good takeaway.
You know what else I found interesting? Rollcatcher talks about how some slate mixers, they actually get into designing their own blends.
Yeah, that's the creative side of
It's
things.
like, who knew? Mixing slate, it's kind of artistic.
Right, there's an art to it for sure.
You're working with different colors, textures, you got to make it all come together.
Absolutely. And RoleCatcher mentions how some mixers, they work directly with architects, designers.
Oh, wow. Really?
Yeah, like creating custom blends to match specific buildings or aesthetics.
That's so cool. So it's not just about functionality,
Right.
but how that roof actually looks, how it
Check.
fits into the bigger picture.
Exactly. There's a real visual element to it.
That's awesome. Yeah. Okay, so someone's listening to this and they're intrigued, right? But is this the right career for everyone? What does Rollcatcher say about that?
Well, they're pretty upfront about the pros and cons. Like any job, it's not perfect.
Right. There's always two sides to every coin.
Exactly. On the plus side, the earning potential is definitely attractive, especially as you gain experience.
Yeah, that's always good.
And as we said, there's room for growth. You can specialize, you can move into leadership, design. There are options.
Right. So it's not just like you're stuck mixing slate forever. There are other avenues.
Exactly. But on the flip side, RoleCatcher doesn't sugarcoat the demands of the job.
Yeah, we talked about the physical demands, but what else?
Well, long hours are pretty standard, often with evening or weekend shifts. It's not always a 9 to 5 kind of deal.
Makes sense. It's construction after all. Things got to get done on a deadline.
Right, and then there's the whole industry side of things. RoleCatcher points out that slate mixing is very much tied to the construction market in general.
Right, so if construction is booming,
Slate mixing is booming too, exactly. But if there's a downturn in construction, well, that's going to impact the demand for slate mixers as well.
so it's not just about the individual skills, but the bigger economic picture as well.
Right, and that's where those transferable skills come into play. Even if someone doesn't spend their whole career mixing slate, they've gained valuable experience along the way.
Absolutely. Like we talked about before, operating machinery, troubleshooting, safety protocols, those are useful skills in a lot of different fields.
Exactly, it's like a backup plan in a way. You start with slate mixing, but you're opening doors to other opportunities.
It's like Rollcatcher saying, hey, even if you move on from slate mixing, Those skills, they stay with you. You can take them anywhere.
Exactly. It's about looking beyond just that one job title and seeing the bigger picture of what you're learning.
So it's like a choose-your-own-adventure kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. You could even end up in a totally different field and think, hey, those slate mixing skills actually helped me get here.
Right. Who knew? Okay, so let's say someone's listening and they're like, all right, I'm sold. Slate mixing it is. What next?
Well, RoleCatcher really stresses the importance of continuous learning in this field.
Which makes sense. Things are always changing. New technologies pop up.
Yeah.
Even in slate mixing, right?
Absolutely. And it's not just about the tech itself. New materials, new mixing techniques, you got to stay updated if you want to get ahead.
Makes sense. Keep those skills sharp. Now, there's not exactly a, Slate Mixers Association out there, right?
Not specifically, no. But RoleCatcher does mention some related industry groups, like the International Association of Plumbing and Mechanical Officials. They have some overlap.
Okay, so maybe not a direct connection, but still a way to network with people in similar fields.
Exactly. And the United Steelworkers, that's another one that could be relevant.
I see. So it's about finding those connections, even if they're not immediately obvious.
Yeah.
Because those connections, they can lead to new opportunities, new knowledge.
Absolutely. And RoleCatcher even suggests something pretty interesting, building a portfolio of your work.
A portfolio?
Mhm.
For slate mixing, what would that even look like?
Well, think about it. Showcasing your ability to create unique blends, match color palettes, achieve that perfect durability.
Ah, I see. Like, check out these awesome shingles I mixed.
Exactly. It's a way to stand out, show potential employers what you're capable of.
Like a resume. But instead of just words, you're showing them the actual results. That's smart. So we've talked about a lot here, but one big question comes to mind as we wrap up. What about automation? Are robots going to be taking over those giant slate mixers anytime soon?
It's a question worth considering. While RoleCatcher doesn't specifically address automation in slate mixing, they do emphasize how technology is changing every industry.
Right, so it's not just about learning the skills of today, but being ready for whatever comes next.
Exactly. Maybe that means learning to program those automated systems, or maybe it means specializing in a niche area where that human touch is still irreplaceable.
That's a good point. So if you're thinking about a career in slate mixing, yeah, it might seem like an unusual path, but there's a lot more to it than meets the eye. It's about precision, creativity, and being adaptable to change. And hey, even if you decide slate mixing isn't for you, hopefully this deep dive has given you some food for thought. Sometimes the most unexpected paths can lead to the most rewarding destinations.